Welcome to another episode of GTN Coaches Corner, where we answer all your questions about triathlon. Jumping straight into it today with this one from Zuroja, who says, hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. Hey, Heather, Mark and James, or just Mark and James in this case. I'm lucky to have spots in both a new World Major Marathon in Sydney and the sold-out Melbourne Marathon, just 6 weeks apart this year. I've run 8 marathons, including 4 in Melbourne, but this will be the closest back-to-back I've ever done. My PB is 3:29. I'm aiming for a PB of 3:19 in one of those races. Given the short recovery, should I target the PB in the first race, Sydney, a rare opportunity, or in the second race, Melbourne, where I'm more experienced, he's run it 4 times, but racing later? And if I'm not going for a PB in Melbourne, what's a realistic target time for the slower of the races? Any tips on how to structure the 6-week block between the two to optimize recovery? This is quite a topical one because...
I was going to say, a lot of people probably around now, whether it's marathons or triathlons, are probably like getting together their race schedule and thinking, oh, is a month enough time between
these are
that?
4 weeks apart. These are 6 weeks apart. Can I do that? And how do I do that?
I don't know what your opinion on this is, but I think probably the easiest method for your particular instance is actually just focus on the first marathon, and I would go for that as the PB one. However, they do say they've got experience on the second one in Melbourne.
Yeah, you see, that's the thing. I think both are possible. You could use the first one as a training marathon and run a PB 6 weeks later in your target marathon. Or, as Mark says, you could go all in on the first marathon and then run the second one. You're going to be a bit fatigued. No, it doesn't really matter what time you do. They're both possible, but how you structure them is very important. And definitely what you can't do is aim for a PB at the first one so that you can aim for a PB at the second one if the first one doesn't go well. Because that just won't work. Neither of those will work.
I mean, I think my logic here is, if ordinarily in marathon training, so building up to a marathon, a lot of people think you need to cover a marathon distance in your training before the actual marathon. And actually, I'd argue you really don't want to, because actually it starts to affect your training and your whole build towards that marathon more than you would like. And therefore, actually doing a marathon 6 weeks out from your marathon probably isn't the wisest thing to do.
If you are going to do it, you're going to have to be very controlled and go significantly slower so that you don't increase too much fatigue or induce too much fatigue, so that you are ready for that second marathon, which is why we say probably your better bet is to do the first one as your PB, and the second one, go back to your old haunting ground and go cruise around a marathon and enjoy it. I think probably also the excitement and enthusiasm of the Sydney Marathon, a new major, is probably going to motivate you to run a little bit harder, and therefore that's probably the one that you should really give it your all at. I think if you tried to run the second one hard, you're going to get over enthusiastic at the first one and blow up both of them.
Yeah, I'd say so. All right, on to the next one. From USA 4034. Been training for a 10K in February in peak phase, but training has been near impossible the last few days, both indoor and outdoor. My case is hazardous air quality from Los Angeles wildfires, but it could be snowstorm or anything, right? Obviously more important things than a race, and love goes out to all those affected by the Los Angeles wildfires at the moment. But any tips on how to resume training once it's safe? Go back into the plan as it was?
Well, yeah, thoughts are with anyone who lost their house in the LA wildfires or was affected by them. Probably a bit late to actually answer this question, seeing as their race was in February, but I think that the answer to this is kind of relevant to anyone who's missed a bit of training, because this is something we get quite often. And I would say that if you miss a week of training, for example, with the LA wildfires, get straight back to your training, back to your program, just write off that week as if it didn't happen and pick up where it was supposed to be on that day. You haven't really lost anything. And if you try and make up anything you lost, you're almost certainly going to be overwhelmed before you get to the race. So just write it off. However, if it's more than a week, if it's 10 days or 2 weeks, then you're going to have to kind of reset back to a more manageable target, a more manageable workload. You can't just pick up 2 weeks later in the program, because that program is going to have built while you weren't doing it, and you're going to have detrained while you weren't doing it. And those two things together are going to get you so far away from where the program is that it's a recipe for disaster. Therefore, you have to back it all the way back to kind of where you left off, or maybe even a little bit before, and resume the training. Don't then cut off the taper from that program. Rather, cut off the peak, if that makes sense. So keep the taper week or 2 weeks that you might have built into the program, and cut off the biggest 2 weeks of that program. So you're not going to quite get to the same peak, but you're still going to taper and be ready for the race. The mistake you make is if you shift your program 2 weeks back, you then are going to be peaking or hitting your maximum volume on race day, which is not ideal.
Panic training to the wire, which I'm
Not a good idea.
quite renowned for. Yeah. All right, next question from O Mararaki 3502. I go to the gym and they have a pool there. The problem is that the pool is just 21 meters long. I'm training for my first Ironman Masuka 70.3, and I was wondering what you think. Should I try and find another pool somewhere else that's 25 meters, or should I stick with this one?
Basically, the question is, can you train for an Ironman or a 70.3 in a 21 meter long pool?
Yes, is the answer. And actually, I would argue just the ease of being able to jump in that 21 meter pool versus you trying to find a 25 or a 50 meter pool far outweighs those benefits of the slightly longer pools. If you can, of course, get in a slightly longer pool, and I would argue maybe a 50 meter pool would be the better option. A 25 is not really going to drastically change anything. 50 meter pool, or even trying to get into swim open water before, just that consistent swimming, sort of non-stop swimming is what you're trying to prepare for these longer open water swims.
Yeah, in a perfect world. But you can definitely train in a 21 meter pool. You will have to adjust your times and your paces potentially from whatever is set in your program. For a 25 meter pool, for example, what people normally use is their 100 meter time when you're swimming, 84 meters?
I mean, the benefit is you hit out some rapid times in 21 meter pools. So
yeah, you can definitely train for it. Don't worry too much about it. And yeah, you'll definitely be ready for your race. Next question from Noosa Triathlete. Hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. I've got a multi-day event coming up in 2025 that involves a standard distance try on the Saturday and a T100 distance on the Sunday. Whoa, that's a big weekend. I'd like to go pretty hard on both days, but not sure how to approach the recovery on Saturday after the first race. I'll likely be back at my hotel by 10 a.m. and need to be back on the start line at 6 a.m. on Sunday. Do you have any general considerations or tips? Thanks for your help and expertise. It's such a valuable resource for us trying to find our way through the sport. Well, you're absolutely welcome. Hopefully we can help you with this one.
Should shout out that we've got a couple of people commenting this week that are GTN members on YouTube.
Yeah.
So thanks you for your support. And don't forget, you can also be a member to support us here on GTN.
Okay, to answer the question of Noosa Triathlete, immediate rehydration as soon as you finish that race. I know even if you don't feel like you've particularly sweated that hard or you're feeling particularly dehydrated, immediate rehydration with electrolyte drinks, and then get onto the food. You got to replace that glycogen as much as possible of it anyway. It may take longer than 18 hours to replace all the glycogen, but if you get that food in straight away, a recovery shake immediately, and then some carbs throughout the day, you can get a long way to replacing most of that glycogen. Just make sure you're not eating anything too heavy or anything too fatty, because of course you got to race again the next day. So yeah, straight back onto that. Even if you don't particularly feel like eating immediately after racing a race, get some food in.
Yeah, the other point then is just trying to do some light active recovery, and that could be as simple as just actually going for a walk. But if you can go for perhaps a swim, something that is going to put as least stress on your body as possible, but get your body moving, the blood flowing, yourself limbered up, that is going to really, you're going to really reap the rewards of that.
Yeah, I would probably suggest as soon as go for a walk, or just go and put your feet up, and then that afternoon go for a walk or a spin on your bike if you have the access to your bike, and try and flush out some of those toxins and lactate and the rest of the things from the race so that you feel a little bit warmer. Obviously, you don't want to be overdoing it. You don't want to be fatiguing yourself anymore, and you want to get back to a hotel and put your feet back up again as quickly as possible. But I wouldn't say that you go back to a hotel at 10 a.m. and stay in that bed until 5 a.m. the next morning when you go to the race, because you'll wake up feeling awful.
Yeah, you definitely will.
Definitely get up and do some movement that evening.
All right. Final question, also from a GTN YouTube member, Nelly Bell 23. Hi team, I have lost my mind and entered Ultraman Australia. Oh my goodness. That starts with a 10-kilometer swim. My question is sleeved versus sleeveless wetsuit. Temperature is not an issue. I have seen videos with time trial comparisons in pools over 400 meters, however, open water for over 3 hours. I'm wondering if the tired arms will be fighting resistance of the sleeves. Any advice would be great. Wow. I think wetsuits have moved on considerably
We've actually done this test.
We haven't swum 10 kilometres.
Well, we didn't. No, we didn't. That's fair.
But,
we didn't.
Yes, I think maybe going back a couple of decades, or maybe even just a decade, there may have been some debate in whether a sleeveless wetsuit versus sleeveless, whether one was better than the other. The advancements in the materials and the flexibility of the materials they're using around the shoulders has advanced so much that really you can't feel the resistance through the shoulders.
I think you can feel the resistance. However, it's not significant enough to offset the additional drag and the additional, so your skin is significantly less hydrodynamic than the outside of a wetsuit. And that's a lot of skin in your whole arm and shoulder that you're exposing to the water. You're definitely not going to offset that with the additional little bit of fatigue from having sleeves material over your shoulders. All you need to do for this is get into your wetsuit for a significant amount of time before the race so that you're actually used to that feeling and used to that slight fatigue of getting your shoulder, rolling your shoulder over in a wetsuit.
I was going to say,
absolutely fine.
The only potential drawback of a wetsuit over this sort of duration, and I've not swum 10K in my wetsuit before actually, believe it or not, is potential chafing. Perhaps with the neoprene sort of bunched around.
Having swum in a sleeveless one, I'm going to go and say, that is not negated really in a sleeveless. In fact, it might be worse.
I was going to say, well, that was going to be my follow-up point, is that I've also seen the chafing of sleeveless wetsuits. So yes, all think, worth considering. Yeah. Good question to ask, but I would probably opt for the sleeved wetsuit.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the 10K swim is the easiest part of that. Particular challenge, isn't it? True. So I imagine next week we're going to get another question from Nellie Bell about the ridiculous
road bike or triathlon for an Ultraman. And then carbon shoes or the most cushioned shoes you can.
That's okay. We'll keep them coming and we'll keep answering them. We'll answer your questions to you below this video or any of our videos. Use the hashtag GTN Coaches Corner and we could be answering your questions next week.